my gosh, Tony, I was thinking of when we met, you know, when you came to Maui and how we met and
Yeah.
the first time, which started this whole relationship.
Yeah, I know, it's pretty extraordinary. But I mean, I could never get over the fact that you were prepared to give me so much of your time and a base camp while I was in Maui, and you didn't even know me. I mean, it was just the extraordinary thing, I thought, that you
Yeah.
So I have a question. So,
okay.
who turned you on to Denali, and how did that whole thing happen?
Okay. Well, it was because the Exploring Beauty exhibition. I asked also people who I came to call my luminaries to suggest places that they thought were beautiful in the backcountry, wild places that they had experienced. And one of them was my great friend Winslow Briggs, who I'd met and traveled with a few times. First of all, down the John Muir Trail, where we kind of started a friendship, and then on several journeys since. And so, as someone who'd been in the backcountry a lot and who was a prominent scientist and world famous scientist, in fact, biologist, I thought he'd be an ideal person to ask. And because he was a plant or a botanicals specialist or a plant specialist, really, I assumed he would suggest somewhere in the rainforest or something to do with plants. But he took me completely by surprise by suggesting Denali. And I asked him why, and of course it turned out it had been very, very important in his life. When he was in the Harvard Climbing Club in 1949, I think it was 1949, he had been on the first ascent of the peak, which is right next to Denali Peak, and it had never been climbed before apparently. And so they went on a first ascent of that, which was successful. But then on the way down, Winslow was secured with a rope to another climber, and they were going down a very steep ice slope. And the fellow who was supposed to have had Winslow on belay, his belay gave way, and he went rocketing past Winslow down this slope. And Winslow turned and did a classic ice axe arrest and managed to stop this guy just a few feet from an enormous precipice. And had he gone over the precipice, Winslow wouldn't have been able to stop either of them, and he'd have gone over too. Probably they'd both been killed. So this was a pretty important moment in Winslow's life, I think. He pretty his entire life, he saw his entire life flash before him, I should think. And of course, it was something he never forgot. But he just loved Denali. He loved that whole idea that, you know, here was this extraordinary mountain that just jutted up out of the tundra in a most abrupt and dramatic way. And this was something he never forgot, and he looked upon it as one of the great moments in his life. So that's why he wanted me to paint it.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So that was the reason that I went. But I must admit there were moments when I cursed Winslow for having sent me out on what I thought was a wild goose chase. It was one of the hardest things I've done in terms of the sheer number of snags that I encountered, really. I mean, Everest, of course, was much harder physically, and rainforest is much more uncomfortable, and you know, lots of places that are deserts are, you know, damn sight hotter. But just the number of difficulties I encountered in doing Denali makes it one of the most difficult things I've ever done, I think.
Well, they say the mountain is only out one third of the time, but that summer I think it was only out about 1/10 of the time.
I was going to say 1/3 seems like a big exaggeration to me. I mean,
yeah. And this year it's been so clear, and I always think of you, you know, and all those times we said, well, there's these wonderful mountains out there. You could just see through the fog and the clouds.
It was absolutely, as I say, the most difficult thing I've ever done. I mean, I've just been rereading. I've been reading little bits out of my Alaska diaries just to remind myself of what it was like. And And it seems like very few days when it didn't absolutely pour with rain, really. And if you remember, we we first went, because Steve and I went on a scouting trip, or at least it wasn't going to be a scouting trip. We were supposed to be gone for about 3 weeks, I think. But it was just remorseless rain, and so we realised that not only were we sort of struggling against the park regulations, because of course we'd got a permit, a very rare thing, a permit to take a car into the backcountry, because we were supposed to be going to that cabin, if you remember.
Oh yeah.
Somebody had loaned me a cabin, an in-holding, which is a very rare thing in Denali National Park. And because of that, I was allowed to take a vehicle into the park. The idea being we were supposed to go down this, somehow with this enormous machine, we were supposed to go down this roaring torrent of a river to find this cabin. Well, before we went, he said, actually, I think the cabin's been washed away because there's been an enormous, there's been an enormous rainstorm. Do you remember this? There's been an enormous rainstorm, and we think it's been washed away. So there's no real point in you even trying to find it. And so we had a permit for a vehicle, but actually no permit to camp in the park. And we did actually see Denali fleetingly for a few minutes, and I can remember Steve saying, well, whatever else happens, it was worth it just to see that fantastic view. And just as he said that, of course, it started to pour with rain, and I said, well, I hope we're going to, see more of it than that. But anyway, it carried on raining, and so we came back to what we thought of as our base camp, Peerooza and Tom's house, and you guys said, well, let's go down south, see it down to Homer, and see if it stops raining down there. Remember, that's how it worked, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then so with nothing else to do really, we went down to Homer, and I can remember sitting and doing that little painting, looking across the
Ketchmack Bay.
That's it, yes, looking across there, and I can remember being a bit cross because you guys had gone off to get pizza, I think, and I was stuck there being bitten to death by the black flies and feeling thoroughly sorry for myself, and did that little painting, and then the next day we went across to Seldovia, yeah, and that's where we were supposed to stay in that log cabin. But unfortunately, the people who owned it were there. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so Steve and I ended up in that leaky, rotten school bus. I can remember saying goodbye to you guys, and Steve, I knew, was going to go home sometime, and driving off up to Denali again to have another crack at it. And I never would have done that, Persis, if it hadn't been for you, I think, or you and Peerooza saying, Tony, you've got to give it another go. You've come all this way. You've got to give it another try. And I was saying, no, I just want to go home. I'm fed up with standing in the rain, hoping something will happen. And well,
it's a long way up there too.
Oh yeah. And I was utterly despondent, really. I could have wept when I left you guys. But anyway, I think I took 2 days to get up there, and then drove back in, only to discover that wasn't allowed to camp, wasn't allowed to hide in the bushes, and managed to persuade the people in the homestead there to. They said, well, you can stay in the bunkhouse along with the waiters and the cleaners and so on. And so I stayed in the bunkhouse there, and then had to trek every day out to my painting site. But which was like a 2-hour trek. And luckily I managed to find. I knew I was going to get busted sooner or later by the rangers, so I thought I'd better take matters into my own hands. So I went and found the local ranger in the backcountry ranger in the ranger station there. As luck would have it, he then said, is there anything I can do to help? And I said, well, I've actually got a car and it has got a permit, but somehow I'm not quite sure about the legality of it. And I wondered if I could get closer to my painting site, because otherwise it's 4 hours out of my working day every day. And he said, yeah, well, why don't you just tuck it into this used quarry around the corner, and I'll tell the other guys to leave it alone. And so then I was able to walk out from there to my painting site, which was only about an hour's walk every day each way. And then apart from it pouring the rain all the time every day, at least that side of it has improved a bit. And finally, after, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 days, the sun came out, and I discovered, having painted all the foreground and all the middle ground, I discovered that that I had actually put Denali in the right place. I hadn't seen it at all, except when Steve and I saw it 2 weeks before. But I seem to remember more or less where it was, and so I sort of arranged all the landscape around it, and then finally the sun came out, Denali came out, and looked absolutely stunning, and was in the right place, and I was able to do the sky, do the mountain, and finish the job. I can see why people make the pilgrimage to go and see it, because if you see it in perfect conditions, which we did momentarily, it is just absolutely stunning. And I hope my painting has sort of conveyed that to, as best I could anyway. Because yeah, I can see it. It is certainly one of the wonders of Alaska, and wonders of North America, really, I suppose.
So Tony, what souvenirs did you collect for your pictures? I don't remember those.
Well, if you remember, in Homer, do you remember we went to that little museum and we all made little strings of
Oh yes,
sort of Inuit strings of things to remind you of. You tie a knot for a certain thing on a certain day, and then you'd string on something else for another day, and so on, to remind you of events. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Like a diary. The idea is a sort of string diary, wasn't it?
Yes.
And we all made them, didn't we? And so on the Homer painting, that's what that is. That's that little string diary that I made. I can't remember what it was reminding me of, but so it hasn't actually worked in that case. And then on the Denali painting, of course, the souvenirs in a way are a bit more fun. They because this was really my only experience of Alaska, I thought I should put in things that everybody knows about Alaska. So in other words, the glass vials. One is oil, because everybody knows about the oil in Alaska. Another one is gold, Alaska gold, because everybody knows about that. And then the third one is a little twig that I found, which looks exactly like a rifle. And I thought, well, everybody knows about Sarah Palin. So so that was my reminder that Alaska had Sarah Palin to think about. And then the other thing, of course, is the grizzly bear's claw, because everybody knows about grizzly bears, and that's got some little Inuit carvings attached to it. And in fact, the one on the painting isn't a real grizzly bear's claw, because it's not legal to have them in California, and so that's an acrylic one made up to look exactly like a grizzly bear's claw. Anyway, so those are the souvenirs, and they always seem to raise a smile when I talk about that picture, because this idea that that's what everybody knows about Alaska.
So Tony, that picture with your glasses, Tom fixing your glasses.
Yes. Yeah.
How did they break? I can't remember.
I can't remember that either. I don't know if I dropped them or sat on them, or they just sort of exploded, didn't they? I mean, the frame just kind of snapped and pinged up, and I thought, oh, that's good. I might as well go home now.
Yeah.
I can't see anything. But no, Tom had other ideas.
Oh no, I can fix it.
Tom, you're such a practical person. I can't believe the beautiful job you made of those. And in fact, there were moments when I just thought, God, what on earth am I doing here? Why don't I just go home? In fact, there were many moments like that. Nonetheless, I mean, I do look back on it now with fondness, as you always do. I think when you've kind of been through a difficult time, but emerged more or less unscathed, you look back and you think, well, actually, at the time, I wished I was anywhere other than Alaska. But looking back, I wouldn't have missed that adventure. It was one of the great ones, really.